Hello everyone. In this video, I will provide an overview of the Core Phonics Survey, its purpose, how it is administered, and how the results are used to guide instruction. The Core Phonics Survey is an individually administered assessment designed for students in kindergarten through grade 12. It serves as a screening, progress monitoring, diagnostic, and outcome assessment to identify students' phonics and decoding skills. The assessment typically takes between 10 and 15 minutes to administer. Therefore, if you are not familiar with the Core Phonics Survey, then you might be asking, what's the purpose of this assessment? The primary purpose of the Core Phonics Survey is to determine how well students apply sound-spelling relationship to decode words. The assessment measures foundational reading skills, such as letter name knowledge, letter sound correspondence, decoding of real words, and decoding of nonsense or pseudo words. Now, pseudo words are intentionally included because they require students to rely on their phonics knowledge rather than memorization. And this provides a more accurate picture of their decoding abilities. So the nonsense words are necessary in order to help kids with their decoding abilities. How is this assessment structured? On your screen, I am displaying the student material. This is what you will hand to your student. This is what your student will be seeing. And this is what you will be getting your scores from. All right, so this is the student material. The first section focuses on reading and decoding skills. And we spoke about letter correspondence, sound, and letter name, right? So the first section focuses on the letter sounds and letter names, as you can see here. However, the second section focuses on reading and decoding. And here you'll have your real words and your pseudo words. All right. Now, within these sections, students read letters, real words, and pseudo words of increasing complexity. This progression helps identify both mastered skills and areas requiring additional instruction. All right, great. So this is the student material that your student will have in his or her possession. Now you might ask, this is the student instrument. What do I use as the person administering the test or the examiner? Let's talk about administration procedures. As the examiner, this is what you will have in front of you. The student will not be seeing it. It is for your eyes only to record the student's score. Now, the good thing about the teacher record form is that it has explicit instructions or directions for you to follow. So say, for example, you're administering and we begin part A, which you should. The directions say to the student, can you tell me the names of these letters? If the student cannot name 3 or more consecutive letters, say, look at all the letters and tell me which ones you do know. If the letter name given is correct, do not mark the record form. And I am guilty of that. When I was administering the assessment, when the student gave a correct letter name, I would put a check mark beside that letter. But do not be like me. Follow the instruction on the form that says do not mark the record form if the student gave a correct letter. And if it is incorrect, write the letter name the student gives above each letter. And if no letter name is given, circle the letter. So let's do an example. Our student here has their material form, right? As their material, their instrument. And you said, go ahead, you read the instruction, your students start naming the letters D, A, N, P. So instead of saying S, your student says P. On your form, you are going to record that your student says P instead of S. The instruction says you are to write that letter that the student gave you above the letter that they made the mistake for. So you'll write the letter P above S. If our student continue and is unable to produce the name for the next letter, which is X, the instruction says, hey, go ahead and circle that letter that the student did not give a name for. And that's what you do, you circle that letter. And you just follow the directions and you score your student. At the end of part B, your student would have gotten, based on the example here, 2 incorrect letters. You'd subtract the 2 from the 26 and you're left with 24. All right, so your student would have gotten 24 letters or letter name correct. And then you move on to part B and you read the instruction for part B. Bear in mind, while your student is giving you the letter name for part A, you would have part B fully covered so that your student is not distracted when giving you the letter names for part A. And as you move on to part B, you'll cover the other parts that are visible in order to eliminate distraction. So you move on to part B and you follow the directions and you do the same thing. Write your score and you continue until the end of the assessment. Now let's talk about the scoring, right? So that's how you'd administer. But what about the scoring and documentation? Once the assessment is complete, each section is scored and transferred to the skills summary on the teacher record form. All right, so each section is scored on your form. And then you will use this information to monitor your student growth over time. So this information is valuable. But before we get to even monitoring student growth, we have to know what these numbers mean, right? What do these numbers mean to us? And how does this data, or some may say data, will help us plan for our students appropriately? Let's look at what the scoring means. So the assessment that you administered or will be administering the Core Phonics survey is a mastery test. It is expected that students will ultimately get all test items correct. But unfortunately, we know that not all students are at the same level. So some will be at benchmark, strategic, or intensive level. This is where our numbers now come in play, and we know what each number represents and how to plan for our students based on data or data. Now, if for parts A to D, as I'm showing you, stop at D. If for those parts, your student, when you add up all those numbers, all those scores, the student got 83 out of 83, then that student is at the benchmark level. That student is where he or she is expected to be. All right. But if your student gets 65 to 80 items correct out of the 83 in parts A to B, then that student, out of the 83, that student is at the strategic level, and we need to start planning for this child. Now, if the student gets 0 to 64 items correct out of the 83, and we're looking at parts A to D, that child is at the intensive level that needs a lot of support. And so we will have this data to start plan explicit instruction for this student. All right, so that's part A to D, and that is what our numbers are telling us. This is what the numbers are telling us, and that is why numbers data is very important. Now let's look at parts E, F, G, H, I, J, K. All right, let's go back to our teacher form, and now we're at the reading and decoding skills. Now for reading and decoding skills, to be proficient or at the benchmark level, our student is expected for each item to get 14 or more correct. You see that? So for example, if we're looking at short vowels in CVC words, when we're finished scoring each section, each list of words, your student is expected to get 14 or more words correct in order to be at the benchmark level, right? Now, if that student only gets 10 to 13 words correct out of the 15, he or she is at the strategic level, and we need to start planning for that student. If for some strange reason, which these reasons do occur, your student gets 0 to 9, and it's not strange. I must take that back. As educators, we know this happens every day in the classroom. If that student gets 0 to 9 items correct out of the 15, then he or she is at the intensive. So when you add up everything, if the student gets 0 to 9 out of the 15, he or she is at the intensive level. Okay, so if we go back to our teacher form, record form, and say we get down to consonant blends with short vowels, and out of each set of words or list of words, our student end up with a score of 9. So when you add up everything, say the student got 0 words correct here, 4 correct here, and 5 correct there. Trying to spread it out to get 9. In total, that student got 9 out of 15. Hey, this data, this number is telling us that, hey, our student for consonant blends with short vowels is at the intensive level. We need to be strategic. We need to be explicit when we're teaching short vowel sound, because this child is at the intensive level. Understood? Now, when we move on to part L, let's go down to part L. And this is where our student is looking at multisyllabic words. Now, when we score our student based on closed syllable words, silent E, consonant LE, you name it, for the list of words that they are given after each score, when you add up everything, right, our student is expected to get 21 or more words correct in order to be at the benchmark level. If the student gets only 15 to 20 words out of the 24 items correct, then that student is at the strategic level and we need to start planning for intervention. If the student gets 0 to 14 words correct out of 24, he or she is at the intensive level and we need to start planning for explicit, systematic intervention for that student. Right? So that is how we interpret our data, and that's how we interpret our numbers, and that's how we're able to plan appropriately and appropriate instruction. And as we say, explicit targeted instruction for our students. So that's for English readers, and we also have the scoring for our Spanish students as well. All right. So after the score, after we have interpreted our data, what next? And there you have it. The students who score at strategic or intensive levels will benefit from targeted instruction, extensive practice in letter recognition, phonics and decoding,